as I just said, then I can assure you care about standards. So you're in the right place for this discussion this evening. I am delighted to have a fantastic panel here with us today, speaking from across the standards, policy and business world, who will be helping us have a discussion about the important role that not just international standards play in delivering market trust and accelerating delivery of NDCs, but actually the wider system of quality infrastructure that standards sit within. That is that system of standards, measurement, assurance, and accreditation, which come together and is the reason why we trust the products that we use without them electrocuting us. It's the reason you trust the food that you put in your mouth and know that it won't make you sick. It's the reason that your credit card works no matter which country you're in. That is quality infrastructure working for you. And that is the system that we are leveraging to ensure it delivers against the climate transition. With that in mind, I'm delighted to introduce our panel. First, we have Sergio Mujica, who is the Secretary General of ISO, and I will let Sergio talk a bit more about what ISO is and what we do there. We have, thank you very much. We have Mathilde Mesnard, the Deputy Director for the Environment at the OECD. We have Ricardo Musa here, who is the Chair of the Sustainable Business COP, a fantastic initiative that Ricardo is going to tell us more about. And last but certainly not least, we have Mike Hayes, Global Partner in Climate Change and Renewable Energy at KPMG, to complete the circle of perspectives here. So with this background of what we're here to talk about in mind and how it connects to the solutions that you are here at COP to learn about and engage in, Sergio, I'm going to first turn to you, because we must start with the Secretary General of ISO if we're going to understand the standards conversation. Sergio, you have had a decorated career in the World Customs Organization. You have worked in the ministry in your home country. You have had a career dedicated to international cooperation. For those here who don't really understand what we mean when we talk about the international standard system, can you enlighten us briefly on what ISO is and how an international standard is actually made in this system?
Very much. Well, ISO is the International Organization for Standardization. We were created in 1947 in London, precisely, with 25 countries at that moment. Now we have 175 plus. It's actually an ecosystem of national standard bodies. In each of your countries, there is one. In the UK is BSI, in France is SAFNOR, and so on. We work on the two main principles. The first one is the national delegation principle. What does it mean? I don't tell you what you need. It's our national standard body that engage with industry, stakeholders, government, and so on, and identify needs. That's the first one. The second one is global relevance, because for an international standard to make sense, need to also provide global solutions for a problem that is understood like a global one. So with those two principles in mind, a national standard body can propose the creation of a new standard. And that's where the real fun starts. So each country that is a member of ISO can appoint experts to participate in that standard. And there are two main components. The first one is expert knowledge, which is in a way the easy part, because you can gather expertise from many places. But the beauty of the system is that each of the ISO members can appoint those own experts. And the second part is what we call the trust building or the due process, because we don't write the standards from Geneva. We follow a process that is based on consensus, inclusivity. We invite everyone to sit in our table, even those who disagree with us. Full transparency, and an indispensable element is the enabling of developing countries to participate in that process. It's not that we invite them to sit in our table, we actively enable that participation. So with that in mind, then we put everything in what I call the consensus building machine. It's a very structured process. So the actual writing of the standard go into a working group. Then we receive comments, many of them, and we need to address each and every one of those comments. It's not that we say, we received comment, good luck with that. We need to address them, and we need to explain why we took them on board or not. Then we create a draft that is shared with all the members for approval and so on.
Joe, and I think consensus building machines are what we certainly need more of in the climate space. And if you're here at the COP with us in Belém or watching online, your eyes are all trained on the negotiations, its very own consensus building machine. And if you believe that all voices should be heard and that all concerns and questions should be considered as we build the new economy underpinned by robust inclusive standards and quality infrastructure, then ISO is a system that you need to know. And we'll be coming to that at the end about how you, each of you, if you're not already, can get engaged. And actually there is an opportunity at our reception after the session to meet some of the national standards bodies that you can work with. So thank you very much for that, Sergio. Mathilde, moving on to you from the OECD perspective. This year, the COP30 presidency has issued a loud call for a robust defense of multilateralism. We all know that multilateral cooperation has been strained by geopolitical headwinds over the last year, and it is essential that we maintain this focus on international cooperation to address global challenges. As a multilateral institution in its own right, as the OECD, what insights can you offer on how multilateral systems can rise to meet the governance challenges we have ahead of us in implementing the Paris Agreement?
That's a big question. I'm not sure I will fully answer it, but let me try to give some elements. So first, let me kind of begin by saying that multilateralism is critical, even more now than ever, if we want to address the climate policy implementation gap. And we need to be more coordinated, we need to be more united to avoid the inefficiencies that come from fragmented approaches. And we know the situation we are in today, politically. And let me repeat something that Elena Vignes said this morning at your first event at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock in the morning, is that in the current context with the strong headwinds, as you mentioned, we need more than ever standards as a shield against backlash. So I think that was a brilliant statement, and we need to really restate it when we can. And I think, what we need today is more innovative and strengthened approaches, more like strengthen, consensus building machines here. And we are another kind of consensus building machine at the OECD. Today the machine is sometimes difficult and sometimes does not produce what it should because of some headwinds, but we need more consensus building machines. We are doing our part at the OECD, and I will give you two examples of how we do so. We have one initiative that is called Including a Forum for Carbon Mitigation Approaches, and the idea here is to put everybody around the table, gather data on all the policies in all sectors, in all 60 countries, both OECD ones and non-OECD ones, to give an idea of to each country how its own policies compare to the others, and also across sectors, across countries and across sectors. And we'll have very soon in December the first release of our database of policies for carbon mitigation approaches. So it's kind of evidence-based, mutual learning, sharing of experiences. This is an input to the consensus building machine, It helps. It doesn't solve everything, but it helps. Let me give you another example. We have the climate change expert group. That is somehow an area, a specific space to exchange across the negotiators at the UNFCCC, but it's not a negotiation. So it's a space where they can exchange information, build up technical knowledge in a non-negotiating space. So it's another way to contribute to this specific consensus building machine.
Sergio, I think your phrase is catching on here. So we're making consensus building machine a thing here today, everyone. And what I really love about what you've both said is actually whether it's a multilateral policy space with member governments or a multilateral system of national standards bodies appointed by their governments, both systems have recognized the importance of having that safe space to speak and hear from those even if they disagree with us. And that is key. We do not want curated, forced consensus. We want to make sure that this is a transition, that we're moving from the standard space to the policy space to the business side of this panel. Ricardo, you chair the Sustainable Business COP, which is a fantastic initiative convened by the Confederation of Brazilian Industry. And your championing voice is not just of industry here in Brazil, where we are at the COP, but internationally through the B20 and other international forums. In the scope of this international conversation we're having today, can you tell us more about what industry is calling for through the Sustainable Business COP and what you need from governance organizations like the International Standard System to help businesses decarbonize effectively?
No, thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation here. Thank you all for coming. Just 30 seconds of explanation of Sustainable Business COP. It's a new initiative, and it's very much related to ISO in the end of the day. What we did, we have the 68 countries represented by their industries, the chambers of industry and commerce of each country. So it's an association of those chambers of industry and commerce. And those chambers and industry and commerce, they represent more than 41 million companies. So in the end of the day, I think we found a way of trying to gather the private sector around the climate debate a very organized way, using those chambers. So that's number one, very important. I think there was not a single chamber that I invited to step in that didn't. Yesterday was Morocco coming in now we're getting to 69. So it's still growing because they want to participate. And when the first thing that, of course, an engineer, so standards for everyone, it's exactly what people request when talking about climate change in the end of the day. I was in a panel, I see some people that were in the panel right now talking about the carbon markets, and there was a lady there talking about the steel industry. They have more than 50 different standards for carbon in the steel industry because we lack standardization on that sense. So it looks like if you look in our number one priority on the SB COP today is to help the carbon market through finding the proper standard to do that. So ISO makes all the sense. When you talk to the CNI in Brazil, they're a huge supporter. There is a thing from ambition to delivery. Standard is exactly what we need. So this is a no-brainer, to be very honest. When you talk to people on the industry, especially on the private sector, and you talk to banks, people, those who are against that, in my view, they have something different their different ambition. So it's really a no-brainer. The point is to get consensus, as he said. So like what you said, have a machine of consensus on that one. But we have to really dedicate ourselves to make sure that we have the proper standards. Everything else will follow. So the level of energy that you should deliver to ISO, for instance, is tremendous. There is not it's really a top priority to us, and it's connected to climate. That's a very important point. And we're talking about carbon markets, for instance, it's really connected to climate.
No, absolutely well said. And I think many of us here certainly agree that it is a no-brainer to have good governance agreed by international consensus, but it always helps to hear it from the chair of the Sustainable Business COP. Mike, coming to you, KPMG needs no introduction, and obviously we've heard some fantastic words from Ricardo about what industry are calling for directly through coalitions like the Sustainable Business COP. But the professional services industry, in many ways, you are right in the heart of what the struggles of implementation are, because many of your clients come to you asking for help to meet their commitments. And KPMG is involved in the development of key international standards like the ISO Net Zero standard, which I know many of you are here to hear more about. But before we get into that, can you tell us more about what KPMG is seeing? What are your clients finding difficult? What do they need more of from governance mechanisms like international standards to help them meet their net zero targets?
Thank you, Emily. Before I get to the second part of your question, I shouldn't bring water on stage.
So excited to answer.
Before I get to the second part about what do we need from standards, I want to articulate what are the real-world challenges that our clients are facing in the market. And I'll be careful. Thank you. And I've been involved in this agenda for many years. Nobody ever said it's going to be easy. And corporate, and one thing I want to be very clear about, we in KPMG, along with all of the other people we work with in the consultancy business, we want corporates to show ambition. That is absolutely critical. And I see my good friend Marcus Nito from UNDP, who's working with NDCs at a national level, floating around there. and we're working with Marcus, there is no point in countries having ambitious NDCs if corporates in those countries do not show the same level of ambition. However, we are facing into some very, very challenging issues at a corporate level. And I use two words, but I'll probably add to that. The first word is cost. Decarbonization and adaptation cost money. And yes, we do a lot of work with our clients to establish the business case, and that is absolutely critical. But let us not forget, this is big ticket investment, and that requires two things. It requires boards to authorize that investment, and you've got to go out and find the financing for that investment. And also, I remind people that this investment has got very real accounting implications for corporates as well. It hurts their balance sheet, it hurts their EBITDA, and these are some of the real world challenges. I have a colleague in the second row, Nadia Montoto, and I work with Nadia a lot, particularly with some of the hyperscalers. And we're running into a different issue, not so much a cost issue, but a technology issue. And if you recall, Nadia, I won't name names, one of the single biggest hyperscalers in the world said to us a number of months ago, they absolutely want to decarbonize, they want to deal with Scope 3, and they made a statement that has stuck with me to this day. They said the products to help them decarbonize their upstream supply chain are about 10 years away from being invented. So how are we ever to get to net zero? And it's one of the reasons I'm passionate about innovation. But that's one type of example. Technology is a barrier in another particular way. And I've got, if it's okay, Emily, I just want to spend 1 minute on this, and then I want to just touch on standards as well. My background is in the area of renewable energy, and if there's one issue that's coming up every day in practice, it's the failure and the inability of our corporate clients to procure sufficient renewable energy to deal with their Scope 2 emissions, but more particularly their Scope 3 emissions across their supply chains. And the failure to scale renewables is starting to really, really hurt us. And this issue is being accelerated, becoming more serious because of the data center revolution, which is putting more and more pressure on energy systems. These are very, very real world issues. Now, there's what I would call the cost, accounting, technology issues. But the other issue, Emily, is standardization. And I would say here unequivocally, we in KPMG absolutely support the work that ISO is doing. It is incredibly important. But I'll tell you the one thing that you're doing that I admire most of all, you are consulting. You're actually engaging with the market. It is so critical that you're hearing our voice. That matters a lot, and there are lots of issues. So at the moment, the problem is there's too many different standards, and corporates are being challenged because they haven't met one particular standard while they're operating to a different one. We have seen corporates step back from taking real action because they're going to be criticized. That, frankly, is not good enough. And if ISO can help us, and I think you can, then I think we're on something quite important here.
How do I begin to summarize that? No, I think those are really important points, Mike, and I think that's where professional services have such added value in the consensus building process, because you are seeing the real world challenges, because clients are coming to you to ask for help. How do we overcome, as you say, the data center revolution challenges that are driving up energy consumption even as regulatory rigor around bringing emissions down tightens? How do we send the right signals that accounts for how market needs are evolving to policymakers, government members of the OECD, to say make the enabling policy and regulations we need to help us meet these challenges? And there are many ways to do this, but one of the most important levers we can pull is that of the international standard system. And sticking with the corporate perspective, and we're gonna go back across the panel again in the reverse order. We're going to come to sort of the key deliverable that is going on in ISO right now to address some of these concerns, which is, of course, the ISO net zero standard that is under development. And what's fantastic is all of the organizations on stage here are involved in that huge juggernaut of a consensus process, and many of you also in the audience are as well. And we're so grateful for the efforts that you have put in over the last 18 months on that. So coming to you both, Ricardo and Mike, as we build towards this next major milestone, the one that Mike has rightly pointed out as being so critical, which is the global public consultation of the draft international standard, what role do you see this international standard playing for businesses in accelerating their own decarbonisation progress? So whichever of you wants to start.
I think again, I still use the word no-brainer on this stuff. When I think to drag the financial market in, to drag the real investors in. Investors, they don't want to have, they need predictability, they need to know what's going to happen. They don't volatility. So when it comes, so that was very easy to get the support from the chambers. I'm talking now on behalf of the Brazilian Chamber of Industry and Commerce. We represent almost 1 million businesses in Brazil. It was, not difficult to get full support for that, because just, again, having access to the capital markets, having access to investors, the financial sector stepping in and supporting us, it's everything related. So again, this is something that was really a no-brainer to get support. When we get in our group here, in a much broader discussion with the other chambers, we have, if I'm not wrong, from the 68 chambers, already more than, I think it's 25 or 26 already supporting ISO exactly the same way. So what we have to do now is really send the message that this is for real. We have to do it faster than we're doing right now and get support from all over. But really, there is not much to really discuss about it. It's really implement.
We can count on good responses from all of your 68 chambers then in the public consultation. Fantastic. And to you, Mike, for your comments.
Can you hear me okay? I don't know if you know this, Emily, but English is not my first language. But there is an expression, I believe, in the English language that we all want to operate to the same standard. That is a colloquial expression we all know. And the problem is we haven't had that on the climate agenda. And I'm looking at Sarah there on nature. Like, if we could get there on nature, that would be fantastic as well. But we just don't, there's a hodgepodge of standards. And that's causing real problems in the market. And I just want to identify two areas that I think will be corrected through the release of the ISO, but let's call it the gold standard. The first area is corporates in the real economy need to work with financial institutions. But if financial institutions cannot compare different transition plans, different levels of ambition, because people are operating to different standards, that gives us a problem. And I believe the way forward, Emily, is the financial institutions working with real corporates, understanding the problems and figuring out, is it a capital problem? Is it a policy problem? And also, this type of consistency using the ISO standard means we can actually better understand where are the real gaps. And I spoke in my first response about the lack of renewable energy. I can tell you the real issue is grid. And once you have lots of people reporting under an ISO standard, and I don't know what the end product will look like, but I will certainly be advising that you go big on this topic of dependencies. Explain the externalities and the external dependencies which are stopping you getting to net zero. That type of disclosure is absolutely critical because it informs governments, it informs investors, and actually that is ultimately going to have all the key actors playing together. That can only be achieved, going back to my colloquial expression, if we're operating to the same standard.
So if we have a round of applause already, Mike, you're doing very well. I think that's such an important point. I mean, imagine if we can get to a place in a world where there is one shared international standard on how organizations should decarbonize to net zero that every country in the world recognizes. It does not mean that you can't go higher, but it means that we are all singing another colloquial expression from the same hymn sheet. And it also means that we can start to send those consistent market signals to policymakers. This is what I can do. This is what I need from you. And we start to move the needle together. And that is a really important role that can play. And again, thank you to KPMG for your engagement in the process. And I hope those comments you're making today, you are going to be feeding in through your national standards body.
Don't worry.
On that topic of policy, Mathilde, I'm going to come back to you. We've heard from you about some of the fantastic convening work the OEC does with your member governments to create that important safe space for policymakers to exchange ideas and best practice, to help move forward in important forums like the COP negotiations, like the UNFCCC. And the OECD has also released some fantastic reports this year on enhanced NDCs for climate and development, and also reinforcing regulatory frameworks which talk about the important role that good governance plays in scaling market trust. These reports also reference relevant developments such as the ISO Net Zero Standard and the ISO Transition Planning for Financial Institutions Standard. And so we'd love to hear from you with all of that fantastic literature out, which we will be sharing with you after this session. Can you comment on how you think international standards like the ISO Net Zero Standard can deliver some of these opportunities that will help policymakers make some of the ambitious decisions that they need to make to accelerate NDC delivery?
Yes, you mentioned our report on that is showing that ambitious NDCs will lead to growth, other development, benefits, but this will not happen automatically or by magic. So there are a couple of things that need to happen, and let me focus on one that is related to our topic today. It's like connecting, climate policy making with the underlying system of standards and quality assurance. And we have done another report this year on the role of national standards and assurance bodies, otherwise known as quality infrastructure, as you said, in supporting regulation. And I think that's where we need to discuss here, because, this COP is focusing on implementation, so that's where we need to go. This system of quality infrastructure exists in every country in some form or another form through government-recognized public and private bodies. And it has, as you explained, built-in international cooperation mechanisms that are working to address the big issues we are facing in terms of regulatory coherence, in terms of interoperability across borders, that helps to reduce barriers to trade as a start. And this report that we have done highlights that because of the diversity of these systems of quality infrastructure, its usefulness for climate policy and climate action goes often under the radar. So with this report, we try to kind of highlight its importance. And to help that, we have developed a practical checklist for governments to better understand their national systems of standards, measurement, and assurance, and regulation, and how these can be kind of mobilized strategically for the environmental governance, the implementation of the NDCs. So, voila.
I think I'm back. That would have been anticlimactic. I think, Mathilde, what you've just said there is one of the most important takeaways that all of you can have from this session. The system of governance we need to deliver regulatory cooperation, to deliver coherency, already exists. Please take that in for a moment. We do not need to build it. We do not need to build something new. It already exists, and as the OECD Reinforcing Regulatory Frameworks report has identified, it often slips under the radar because you already use it, and you don't use it specifically for climate action only. So in your country, as Sergio rightly pointed out earlier, I guarantee that you have a government-recognized national standards body. You will have some form of accreditation body, which itself connects up to an umbrella multilateral system known as the IAF, the International Accreditation Forum. You have some kind of recognized measurement body, which ensures that if I in the UK say 1 kilogram means this, my colleagues in India agree that 1 kilogram also means this. This is the system that the OECD report is directly advising governments to engage with and better leverage to deliver that market trust and that governance needed to ensure that we are delivering on these international commitments of NDCs under the Paris Agreement in local contexts that work for those businesses, for those jurisdictions, and crucially for those people. So I think that's a really, really important point, Mathilde, and We will be sharing the resource to that report after this, so do hang around for that. Sergio, we're coming to get ready with some questions for our panel. Many people here today, as you can see, are interested to know on what is the progress update that ISO has to share following your announcement at London Climate Action Week last year to develop this verifiable international standard on net zero for organizations. It would be fantastic to hear from you on the scale of this work to date and where we are, and ultimately what everyone should be looking to next from ISO on this work.
Very well. To understand where we are today, it's important to provide some background information and explain where we've been in the last few years. But first of all, I wanted to build on the point made by Mike. The problem with standards, in some areas, we have too many of them. And with the best of intentions, different organizations have created frameworks and standards that overlap or are competing or creating a degree of fragmentation. And to solve that, what we really need is partnership and a lot of generosity, actually, to combine our standards into something that makes sense to everyone. An example of that is our recent agreement with GHGP in an area as important as carbon measurement and accounting. We cannot have parallel systems to measure carbon emissions. We need to come up with something that makes sense to everyone, and that's the effort we are in. So that's problem number one. But the other side of the coin is that there are some significant areas where we do not have enough standards or standards that provide that level of clarity. And one of them is precisely. So in terms of background, two main milestones to highlight. Number one, Emily, exactly 3 years ago, Sharm el-Sheikh, where we launched the net zero guidelines.
3 even now, I realize.
Yeah, 3 years ago, it's unbelievable. And what I want to highlight here is there was really a leadership exercise pushing boundaries, because those guidelines were created in a record time, 3 months. That's completely alien to our system, with participation from 1,200 people from over 100 countries. And we came up with something that is perhaps not perfect, but was good enough to start that conversation. So that's milestone number one. Milestone number two, 18 months ago, exactly in the London Climate Action Week, it was announced that that first effort, that baseline, that guideline, would be transformed into fully fledged international standard. So there is the ambition. And where we are today, as I explained before, we have technical committees, subcommittees, but then the actual writing of the standard is made by working groups. And in the case of net zero, we have one of the most successful working groups. It's number 3 in number
we have a member in the front row.
In number of participants. 70 countries are actually doing it, participating in the writing phase. The problem is that I could give you a new standard in 3 months or in 3 weeks even, if I write those standards from my office in Geneva with 5 experts. But that is not what we believe in. That is not our value proposition. So we have those 70 countries participating in the actual writing. And when we put together a draft, then we invite for comments. Guess what? 1,400 comments. So we are in a way victim of our own success. And I do believe in inclusivity, and I do believe in having a process which is open enough for us to receive those comments, also properly address those comments. So it's taking longer than what we wanted, but for good reasons. So we believe that perhaps in Q1 next year, we will be able to finalize the draft, the first full international standard draft that will be submitted for open consultation through our members. And the ambition is that by the end of next year, perhaps early 2027, we will have our very first independently verifiable international standard on net zero.
So there you have it, folks.
Thanks
And you know, that does deserve a round of applause, because you know, as Sergio says, like, we don't write the standards, you do, and so it's to yourselves that you applaud. I mean, just take in, I mean, it is one of the largest international working groups ISO has ever seen, and that's with the numbers capped to make sure that fair and balanced and proportionate representation is there. So you can only imagine the size if it wasn't. And it's also worth noting that, again, we don't do this alone, not just with the huge number of countries across developed and developing economies that Sergio's mentioned. But crucially, we do it with many of the leading standard setters many of you already know and work with, because interoperability is such a key message and such a key point, and we're about practicing what we preach. Real good interoperability is about making sure you invite the leading standard setters into the process to co-author that work with you, part of that international consensus building machine, this phrase we're going to make a thing after today. And so we're very grateful to those leading standard setters for their engagement and for their shared vision to scale net zero as a norm across global markets. It's now time for Q&A. So I'm going to turn to the audience and ask if we've got any brave people who want to kick us off, and don't feel that you have to sort of be afraid of what your question. There is no sort of silly question. This is a system that is open, inclusive, and we want to make sure that everyone feels comfortable in understanding what we do. So I'm glad to see some hands are coming up already. If you could say, if you're happy to, who you are, where you work, and then who your question's for, that would be fantastic.
Hello, I'm Jessica from the Bilateral Development Agency of France. I'm not representing AFNOR, even if we had discussions with them. Actually, maybe I have an annoying question. When you set a new standard, I guess that you question even the concept from the beginning. So I would like to understand, not to understand, at least to have a sense of the discussions that you had about the concept of net zero, even and how and why to standardize that. I know that there is other standards existing in the market. And my second question, I think, I really appreciated the fact that you mentioned what's missing in many standards, the dependencies toward transition, and nobody can transition on itself. So I'm a believer on standards. So it's just a question to raise a discussion. Thank you.
So that's a question on sort of why standardize net zero? Okay, great. Sergio, should we start with you?
Yeah, first in terms of definitions and terminology, that is one of the very first challenges we had when we started this journey 3 years ago, because you are not going to believe me, but I'm a lawyer. 2 lawyers, 3 opinions. In terms of a climate expert, you can have as many opinions as experts in the room. So the very first thing you need is to come up with an agreed terminology. What is net zero? What is a transition? What is the role of leadership, and so on? So that I hope would answer the question.
And there were other questions coming as well. Oh, good. I'm seeing more brave people.
Okay, so Manveer Gill, Sustainable Finance Lead at CDP. We're an implementer of standards of sorts. So to comment first of all on NDCs, as was raised. So we actually just produced a report on transition finance. We've done some natural language processing on 4,000 disclosures of dependencies to figure out what a company is saying. Technology comes up the most required for change, and then there's regulation, there's logistics and infrastructure around that. So I implore you, if you're curious about dependencies, let's build on some of those insights. My question to the panel is around the notion of consensus alongside common but differentiated responsibilities. So I say this knowing, I really believe in the power of standards for trust at scale, but how do we deal with that in a way that brings everyone on board? Finance, if we're talking about the use of standards to scale finance, in the COP context tends to mean how are we getting finance flowing to EMDEs? And a lot of the recommendations, requirements in these standards are quite difficult to meet for SMEs in certain markets. So how do we grapple with that tension while still creating trust?
Fantastic question, and thank you also to CDP for the engagement in the ISO net zero process. And I think you've put your finger on probably one of the hottest debates in the consensus process, so a great question. I don't know if Sergio, if you want to start, but also turn to others on the panel for comments on this, because this is a really, really important question.
Okay. First of all, in the ISO system, consensus doesn't mean unanimity, and I will explain. But what I wanted to highlight is that we work under the logic of a double layer of consensus. What does it mean? Together with the International Technical Committee, each country, each and every one of those participating will have a national mirror committee. So they need to engage at the national level with the relevant stakeholders and to agree on a national position. And it is that national position that will be brought to the International Committee to achieve international consensus. That's point number one. Point number two, unanimity is a very complex, ambition if you want to make progress. And we have seen many organizations that are really stuck because of the lack of unanimity. So at the ISO system, we believe that consensus means absence of sustained opposition, meaning that you need to be able to interpret the direction of travel and to build a good enough approach that can be accepted by everyone. So it looks similar, but it's quite different, and it gives you the possibility to make progress.
Can make one comment only. I think we have to always, on the private sector, we try to distinguish policy from standards. One thing is to measure properly what we're going to do with that information, if we're going to establish. So a very good example is the finance market. You have your net income, but you can tax companies in a different way. But net income for all the companies are the same. So if a tobacco company, if it's arm dealer company, or whatever the company, you measure the company the same way. What you're going to do, the policy in place, that's a different thing. So the first foremost here, ISO, is to create a standard. Then we can, with a better standard, we know what we're measuring. Then you can tackle the policy and say, okay, if it's net zero when, whatever. But a standard for me, and we're saying it's very clear, when we start trying to mix things, the policy with then you create a confusion. So for me, it's really, measure things is very important, then the policy is different. Of course, policy is the most important piece, but without the foundation, you cannot implement the policy.
So I'd like to come at this question of consensus from a slightly different direction, if I could. I think we're getting to a point, and I'm sorry if I'm being a little bit provocative, that consensus is becoming a luxury. We are not heading into, we are currently in a disorderly transition. That is the reality, and I wish we were more honest about this here at COP. The time for debating the perfect world is fast escaping. We use somewhat scientific words about disorderly transition. We should use the words about what that actually means in practice. So we can sit around tables for the next 3 years trying to work out consensus. Meanwhile, we have a pretty serious issue that's facing us today. So if we can't get to and get behind and rally behind what ISO are doing quickly, the choice will be taken out of our hands. Governments will step in and they will regulate. So please get on board with what's happening. Yes, nothing's going to be perfect. I'm definitely going to have debates with Emily about what they should and should not do. All I ask for is to be consulted, to be part of the decision-making process. That's good enough. We have to get on with this.
May I add one point to your point, that yes, in terms of regulation, what we need to apply, it's proportionality, but that's the regulatory level or the policy level. And to your point, yes, we are now in a world of let's try to build coalitions of the willing, because the consensus, I'm afraid, we won't get there.
I think it's important to understand what consensus means, because it cannot be understood like a sentiment, like blah, 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 let's fix the world together. Consensus is a process. That's what I talk about, a consensus building machine. It's a process that you need to trust. You follow the process, and the ending result will be a good enough approach that we can live with. Not perfect, but it's good enough, and we can make progress.
I think your question has fired up our panel, so thank you so much for it. Actually, yes, more efficient.
Wow, what an incredible panel this has been. I haven't seen so much energy all day.
Thank you all so much for the work that you do on governance, on creating the multilateral system and the processes that allows us, people who work on standards, to have a space to do that consensus process as you described it. And thank you all for your support for the Net Zero standard. It has been a passion of mine to work on that standard. My name is Kaya Axelson. I'm with the Oxford Net Zero. So I wanted to address the question that I felt went unaddressed. 80% of the world, according to our tracker, 90% before the US backed out, had committed to net zero. And whether or not we think that's I certainly don't think that's the only sustainability aim that matters, and I don't think it resonates with all people, but I do think it matters that we have those commitments. So that's why I've decided to work behind it and to work through this process. The question I have to the panel here, which is I think the most important question at this stage, is around governance and around which standards we decide to promote as a part of the platforms that we're all a part of. One of the things I am so in awe of in the ISO process is that I get to talk to industry, civil society, and delegations from countries in equal measure with true legitimacy in that process. And we hear each other. There's deep listening, there's crying, there's laughing, but that process has legitimacy. I also see other processes that claim to be standards that are backed by industry, that are private sector, that would like to disrupt, that have kind of their own agenda, that would prefer not to have the accountability of a process that goes through legitimacy. How do we help the public understand the difference between a kind of nefarious private sector standard versus one that is developed with such legitimacy? And how do you internally decide to promote one standard over another?
It's a fantastic question. Who would like to kick off?
No, always I think we have to look into science-based. We have to try to, for me, as much as we can, have scientists and like institutions with credibility like ISO behind it. It's because if you don't have, if it's a standard created by a set of individuals without, I don't know, the independency of ISO, for instance, it loses the credibility. It's very quick. I don't see how the private sector does not have this power. It's very scattered. It's not concentrated in 1, 2, 3 companies in the end of the day. So I think if you follow, I think the major companies, and that's why ISO has so much support from all that. So I don't have that concern, to be honest. Maybe you are more involved than I am on this one, but I clearly see a lot of support going to ISO all over. Maybe I'm a bit optimistic.
I have a funny suspicion I know which initiatives you're talking about, but I think I was unequivocal earlier in the session, speaking on behalf of my own organization. We are getting behind the ISO Net Zero standard. It is not in our interests, it is not in the interests of our clients, and it is not in the interests of society to do anything else.
I'm good. And if I can add one nerdy point to this answer, which is that, again, we should remember that we're grounding this in good governance principles. And there was a fantastic panel earlier with the OECD, with the World Trade Organization, with ISO, and some fantastic companies talking about exactly that. And we skip over the fact that the importance of that multilateral system that supports economic cooperation, that ISO has existed for almost a century. The UK's national standards body, BSI, that I am part of, the UK member of ISO, next year we will be 125 years old. Thank you, I love the applause we'll get for that. Shout out to BSI. But the important point here is that these principles of economic cooperation are deep in the real economy. And one of the ways that you can look to seek legitimacy from the standards that you follow is that the World Trade Organization's Technical Barriers to Trade Agreement actually seeks to answer this through its sort of 6 principles of international standardization. And some of those principles, and I won't name them word perfectly, and anyone who wants to can certainly jump in, is things like consensus process. So is it open? Do you seek the feedback from the market? That is built into the DNA of how ISO works. You simply cannot get an ISO standard into existence unless you have consulted, unless you receive majority approval from countries. Are developing economies at the table? You cannot just go and ask your friends in big corporations in rich countries and say, yep, that's done, we've sorted that out, that's the answer. You must make sure you have made efforts to bring all economies to the table. Another thing that ISO does brilliantly, where over 2/3 of that system of more than 175 countries are from the developing country classification. So actually, ISO is a system where the majority of countries come from, indeed, as we should refer to it, the global majority. And so all of these aspects and more that I haven't named today, if you're really keen, you can look it up on the WTO website. All of that feeds into how you can make sure you're recognizing good governance when it faces you, and possibly make it easier to distinguish between some of the more opportunistic or reactive measures that may seek to disrupt, as you said. Any other questions? I saw a couple of hands. Great.
Hi, everybody. I'm Nomana Arbex. I'm a partner at KPMG, and I have been deeply involved with developing standards for sustainability for more than 15 years. I was also the deputy CEO for the GRI based in Amsterdam. So developing standards for sustainability and reporting is not exactly new for none of us working in this field for very long. And GRI, for example, has developed a global due process to be accepted as a standard like first, and then standards for sure. And there are lots of balances, of gender balances in the working groups, North and South, and everything else, working with ISO, with regulators, and companies were part of the teams and everything. So, took us like 10 years to get to a technical level that was globally accepted. Took us having an international organization really behind that due process and trying to keep it going. Lots of money from many supportive organizations, but also a global network of people working to having companies and regulators and investors understanding it, first of all, and adopting it, understanding the connection of the work that this is a public good, right, nowadays, and the work that this all had in connection to the United Nations principles and all the principles that everybody relied on. So having said that, my question is more like, I do understand the standards. I love when you say, Musa, that you hope that you're going to have a language and everybody's going to stick to it. Developing standards is kind of not exactly like that. It's really a bumpy road. But I think the journey is exactly the one we have to take. But the thing is, so first of all, we have a lot to learn from those, that have been involved. I really recommend that. But the one thing that was really all the time a kind of a struggle for all of us involved in those standards development globally was how to make it something, a language, a global language that everybody used or regulators relied on. And took us very long, right? For GRI, probably like 10 years. So when you think about that, imagine that everything you were planning and dreaming of would work, and we would have a standard like in 2-3 years maybe, ready to go. So how long do you think will take until you have this as the global language? Talk about that.
I couldn't agree more with you. That's my general comment. And we have this illusion that our job is finished when we publish the standard. It's not at all. That's just the beginning. Because if what we want is to create impact, the real impact will only happen when the standard is implemented and when we see the change in that organization, in that country, and hopefully globally.
Look into I always compare to the finance market. The crash of the 1929, there was no US GAAP, no IFRS. They started that, if I'm not wrong, on 1935, right? And after that, we have Enron, a lot of scandals, and keep progressing and improving the standards of the finance market. It's pretty well established in the other day. So I agree with you. It will never be, and to your point, we have to be careful not to dream to have the utopia or have everything ready, but we have to keep moving forward. I think we have much more technology today, much more data today to be faster than in the past. In 1935, they have like 6 guys in New York trying to figure out the accounting system and how to improve that to create US GAAP. without much data. They do everything in their hands at that point in time. It took a long time to be. Right now, we have much more, I would say, ways to speed. But I think we have to be careful not to try to do it perfectly, but let's trust on the guys who know how to do it and support them as much as we can and move on. As you said, we cannot wait much more. But
Thank you so much. We're coming to time. We have 1 more minute before we welcome our very final speaker who will open this evening's reception. Are there any other last burning questions that you want to get into our fantastic panel this evening? Everyone is sated. You've done a fantastic job. First of all, a huge round of applause for this phenomenal panel. Thank you all for your involvement, your driving forward of good governance. The ISO Zero Standard Progress Update has been given. Before you go anywhere, I'm seeing bags come up. We've got 1 more speaker to really hammer home this important point, because this session is ultimately about how do we deliver all of these good outcomes to accelerate NDC delivery under the Paris Agreement, which is what we are all here at the COP to do. So I'm delighted to welcome Jen Austin, the Director of Policy and Strategy at the UN Climate Champions, who is going to really give us some last words about the importance of this for the COP30 action agenda. Jen, thank you.
Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. Pleasure to be here. Thank you so much. I think I stand between you and the reception. So thanks to the panelists. I just caught the very tail end there. A few questions, but we have been working together with partners on regulations and net zero for a long time in the Climate Champions team since COP26, where we launched the Race to Zero. And so just pleased to be here today on behalf of the Climate Champions team to congratulate ISO and BSI and others on the good work and the progress that you've made. As that last question made clear, we're not there yet, and we all know that, but it's really been a strong foundation. You guys have done so much work in helping bring together and harmonize standards, which is so critical because we hear that all the time. Everybody hears that all the time. Solving climate change is complicated enough, and if there's too many different things that try to define perfect and great and good, it gets quite complicated. So we're very proud of having been on this journey with you guys as Race to Zero. It's a great example of the power of the action agenda, which really is an example of how voluntary leadership and best practice and so many partners coming together to pilot these projects, to pilot these practices, to work together, to push each other, to make them better and stronger and more clear, have then helped really get to a strong shared norm of what good looks like on these standards, which then has been able to help inform the road towards making those standards and ultimately regulations in different places around the world with more and more similarity between them. So that's exciting. We continue to work on the action agenda in many, many ways and on many topics across COPs here at COP30. You all are hopefully seeing the action agenda in its many manifestations in events and announcements and progress made across a variety of topics. The Brazilian presidency is introducing a new structure for the action agenda that matches the themes of the global stocktake, the structure of the global stocktake, and is starting to work to organize the work of all of the voluntary action in direct support of some of the outcomes from the negotiations, from the Paris Agreement, from the UNFCCC process, and then really gathering a real emphasis on gathering up existing initiatives to make sure that they're building on this track record of expertise and work. So hopefully you see that across a lot of topics around the COP this next 2 weeks or for however long everybody is here, and really just want to congratulate you all on the work that you're doing. Wish you all good luck. Thanks probably to everyone in the audience who I'm sure you're here because you're all agents of action and change and expertise yourselves. So thanks for being here. Thanks for sharing all of your expertise. And I think with that, we invite people to join the reception, continue to network, share ideas, share the work. And yeah, it's great to be here. Congrats again, and looking forward to chatting with many of you going forward.
You heard that instruction, and while you are enjoying the extensive beverages that we have for you, I don't know whether the food has made it. A QR code will remain on screen where you can read more about the ISO Net Zero standard. You can find your national standards body, which I'm sure you're desperate to do over a glass of wine. And you can also read the fantastic research from the OECD on the importance of leveraging your national quality infrastructure for NDC delivery.